Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, Alan Bishop, the alchemist of the Black Forest. I know I don't really need to say that because I have an intro now, but, old habits die hard. So, excellent question here today from a viewer about absinthe. So, from Jim Pierce, message. Updating a couple of absinthe questions. I started this adventure because of a bet from the wife. She wondered if I could make a Jägermeister. I did some research and said absinthe is more doable and a better product. Amen to that, man. For my neutral, I've taken 20 gallons of cheap apple juice, cheap concentrate, and a mix of store-bought apples. I fermented this with Y yeast 4134 sake yeast, which makes a delicious cider, plus it throws apple esters, so when the yeast got ran through, it added that to the distillate. That's great. I still have to run it through a second and possibly third time to up the proof for absinthe project. This is the recipe I've come up with based on you and still it's 1700s absinthe and additional herbs from recipes I've found online. What do you think of this? 6.6 mil, 85% distillate, 270 grams common wormwood, 160 grams anise, 160 grams fennel, 80 grams mint, 160 grams lemon balm, 15 grams angelica root, 30 grams star anise, 45 grams calamus, 10 grams coriander, 6.8 liters of distilled water. Coloring herbs or greening herbs, 9 grams spinach, 6 grams cologne de mint, 6 grams hyssop, 9 grams Roman wormwood, 6 grams licorice root, 3 grams speedwell. Plan is to do a method that you told still it. Question on maceration. Many recipes call for up to 10 days soak on alcohol, then another 5 on diluted batch before you run it. Is that a good way to go? Another question is the greening herbs, could you put them into the next batch you cook off to recover flavors and a bit of alcohol? Original plan was to use tails from my wild yeast apple ferments, but I needed more, so switched to this. Might have enough from them for one smaller batch. Sorry for such a long email. Hope all is well, and thanks for all the advice. Fantastic email, and I'm glad to see this absinthe stuff coming in because that means there are several home distillers out there really stepping up their game. As I've said many times, I consider absinthe to be sort of the master thesis for a distiller, right? This is the way that you prove yourself as a distiller. This is next level stuff. Regarding your botanicals here, so we're saying, these are grams per gallon, okay? So a couple things that I would adjust if I were you. So you've got 270 grams common wormwood. Even for the early absinthe recipes, that's pretty heavy. I take that down to closer to like 100 to 150, honestly, to be really palatable. 100 to 120 grams per gallon is more than enough because otherwise it can become very bitter and very out of balance if you go heavier than that with the wormwood. You've got 160 grams of anise, 160 grams of fennel. I would say bump that up closer to 200. 80 grams of mint, that's doable. It's probably going to be a little strong on the mint side, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You also didn't specify which mint you're using here. So peppermint would be the traditional mint to use for that. 160 grams of lemon balm. So the lemon balm is usually actually a coloration agent, although I do use it in distillation. 160 grams is up there pretty well. I'd probably be closer to somewhere maybe, let's say around 50 or 60 grams, somewhere in that range. 15 grams angelica root. I love angelica root for structure in particular, and it gives a nice earthy sort of characteristic. 15 grams would be on the high side, but that's not bad. I'd probably be closer to somewhere between 5 and 10 grams. You do have star anise in here at 30 grams. With the amount of green anise you have in here, you really don't need that star anise. And you don't really see star anise start to slip into absinthe production until very late in the game. And it's always considered of a sort of inferior quality to green anise. So bear that in mind. 45 grams of calamus. That is a ton of calamus root in particular. Somewhere between 5 and 10. Again, with the roots, oftentimes 5 and 10 is going to do everything you want to do. Let's see. So you had this at 6.8 liters distilled water. I'm just trying to read through your recipe as I go. I apologize. As far as your coloring herbs, so you've got a ton of coloring herbs here. And again, I won't tell you not to do this, but what I will say is that you probably don't need as many of them as what you have in here, and they might start to conflict with one another, and they might start to particularly conflict aromatically. So 9 grams spinach. So the spinach is cool because it's a very early absinthe sort of thing. As far as flavor goes, it's not one that I myself would prefer, but I encourage you to play around with it. 6 grams cologne de mint. Probably what I would do, this is just me, I would switch out that with your lemon balm and use that instead. That's more traditional for sure, and I think you're going to have a much more balanced aroma come from that. 6 grams hyssop, nothing wrong with that. 9 grams Roman wormwood, nothing wrong with that. You've got licorice root in here for coloring, and for me, what I would say is kick that licorice root over into your distillation. Licorice root is really where you're going to get a lot of your mouthfeel from. It's really going to give a full-bodied sort of feel to everything you're distilling. It also sort of enhances aromatic principles, but it is much better, in my opinion, if it's actually in the distillation. I've never done it in the coloring. It might be worth trying, but I really would encourage you to actually use that in the distillation itself, because I think you'll probably be much happier with the results there. And a 3 gram speedwell, which is interesting. So I have seen that in recipes as well, usually in the distillation, and those are usually later recipes of the Le Bleu or Swiss Blanche sort of tradition once it became illegal after the ban. Question on macerating mini recipes. Call for up to 10 days soak on alcohol, then another 5 on diluted batch before you run it. Is that a good way to go? So if you're not going to run your botanicals directly in your still, that's probably the way to go. Yes, it's probably a little bit long. I would say 5 to 10 days is more than enough to get the extraction that you're going to get out of it. And then, of course, gently squeeze those botanicals. Traditional absinthe, though, real absinthe recipes, you're not going to see that 5 and 10 day thing happening. What you're going to see is a 1 hour period at 140 degrees and then 24 hours prior to distilling is what you're going to see, and that's going to be botanicals in the still. Another question is on the greening herbs. Could you put them in the next batch to cook off your recovered flavors and a bit of the alcohol? You absolutely can, and this is actually one of the things that old school Belle Epoque absinthe distillers did. They actually had various grades of absinthe, and so they had various different still apparatuses in order to recover alcohol like that. So they would have a smaller still that was used just specifically for this to pull those flavors off. Now those flavors can get a little bit weird, a little bit funky, because they have macerated secondarily on different herbs, and so the balance is going to be off. But it's certainly something you could distill off or even distill in with your next run of base spirits at a high proof in order to get more oils and more flavor into your next batch. Absolutely. The original plan was to use tails from wild yeast apple ferments, but needed more to switch over this. So switch over this. I think you're on the right path. When I mentioned switching up your botanical bills a little bit, it's because I'm thinking about palatability and what is going to represent best what an absinthe that people would be familiar with would taste like, right? An absinthe that is not as bitter and not as sort of all over the place as they can get sometimes, right? And there's nothing wrong with using tons of botanicals. I've got a lot of absinthes where I use multiple botanicals, but it becomes very much about balance and a balancing act at that point. So those are just notes to sort of take into account for. And also for anyone who is interested in absinthe as well, and I will give a recipe here in a few days. So the Alchemist Cabinet Volume 2, the Black Forest Method, has got a couple of absinthe recipes in it from my works. They're not exact to what I do, but they'll put you in the ballpark. So if you're interested in making traditional style absinthe such as this and really understanding those botanical loads, I've done a lot of research on that and a lot of distillations with that sort of material. So I think that might help some of you guys out as well in the future. But I love seeing these emails come in regarding absinthe. So guys, keep up the good work. And Jim, let me know how this turns out for you and what you decide to keep, what you decide to change, etc. And I'd like to hear what you think of it when it's done, man. Also, I love the apple base. That's fantastic. So you do that apple base with that licorice root in the distillation, you're going to be really surprised at the aromatics and the mouthfeel. So, as always, guys, if you have questions, bishopshomegrown@gmail.com, thealchemistcabinet.com, YouTube comments, and or social media, and I'll catch you guys soon.